Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the book of Chronicles. We are in Chronicles 1, chapter 6 we are about to study today. We are still in the middle of the first 9 chapters, which are primarily genealogies and lists of names. As I've been pointing out until now, the purpose of all of these chapters is to give the people, as they reestablish the nation of Judah, the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel after the exile, the Babylonian exile was over, and the returnees came back, to give them a sense of their place, a sense of history, and to tell them what they need to know about their mission that is coming up, and to give them a sense of continuity, where they are, why they're there, etc. So I'm going to point that out in chapter 6. We've dealt with extensively the lineage of the tribe of Judah, which was the primary tribe. Most of the survivors were and returnees were descendants of the tribe of Judah. We, of course, focused on the line of the kingship. We focused on the line of the tribe of Shimon, who was together with Yehuda because of the proximity, their location. We mentioned that. We talked about the history of the tribes in the eastern side of the Jordan River. Those were the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. And we also talked about the lineage of the Kohanim, the high priests, the Kohanim Gedolim, all the way down until the last Kohen Gadol of the First Temple period, the one who was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest at the time of the exile. We're continuing now in chapter 6 with the Shevet, with the tribe of Levi, the Levites. And that is what this chapter is focused on. I may not translate every time I read a name. If there's a word I don't translate, you can assume it's a name. Bnei Levi, the sons of Levi, Gershom, Kahatu, Merari. These are well known from the book of Exodus and throughout the Torah. Ve'ela Shemot Bnei Gershom, the sons of Gershom were as follows: Livni, Veshimi, Uvnei Kahat, and the sons of Kahat were Amram, V'Yitzhar, V'Chavron, V'Uziel. And Bnei Merari, were Machli, Umushi. So these were the families of the Levites according to their forebearers. Now, we're going to go on a few little tangents, just slight biographical details here and there, all of which serve a purpose to, again, the same thing, to give the people the sense of place and continuity and where everyone fits in the history and how they should hopefully fit in this newly established, the one being established nation. Gershom had Livni beno, his son Livni, Yachat beno, his son Yachat, Zima beno, Yoach beno, Ido beno, Zerach beno, Yotrai beno. So those were his sons. Bnei Kahat, the sons of Kahat, Aminadav beno, Korach beno, Asir beno, his son Asir, Elkanah beno, Ve'aviosaf beno, Ve'asir beno, Tachat beno, Uriel beno, Uzziah beno, Ve'Shaol beno, so on. So those were their descendants. Uvnei Elkanah, Amasai va'Achimot. Elkanah, his son Elkanah, Bnei Elkanah, his sons were Tzofai beno, V'Nachat beno, Eliav beno, Yerocham beno, Elkanah beno, Uvnei Shmuel haBechor, Vashni va'Avia. And Shmuel ben Elkanah, this is the famous Samuel, the famous prophet Shmuel, who was a descendant of the tribe of Levi, his father being Elkanah. So this was that famous Shmuel. Again, as we have seen many times, many famous figures are brought up. We even saw Moses was brought up in the last chapter, and then no biographical details shared, because for the purpose of this genealogy, there wasn't anything to be gained by for this purpose at this point, by telling stories about Shmuel. Of course, This, if you would like to study the story of Shmuel, of course, you can go back to the book of Shmuel, but this is the point of this genealogy here. Bnei Merari, the children of Merari, I'm kind of going through this quickly for a reason, like I explained. Machli, Livni beno, Shimi beno, Uza beno, Shima beno, Chagia beno, Asoya beno, all the way down to that generation. And now we have a little bit of a biographical interlude, a little bit, some short, small biographical detail being thrown in. I'm at verse 16 now, and this does serve an important purpose, because as they're reestablishing, until now we talked about reestablishing the kingdom, we talked about reestablishing the priesthood, right, and the purpose of the high priest. All of those who were established in history during the times that we mentioned before in the chapters before. But now we have another event in history which we would not have known if the chronicler would not have told us this. This was not mentioned in the earlier books, but it's very important in the context of what they're about to reestablish. Because when they reestablish the tribal lands, they have to conquer the lands, they have to sell the lands, they have to build the lands, and we talked about all of that. They have to reestablish the temple and the temple service, but there was an important part of the temple service which the Levites, who we're discussing now, used to do, and that was the song, the singing. So there was clearly song taking place in the tabernacle prior to the days of David, but here we find out that David was responsible for kind of standardizing it and making and designing a system for the song which the Levi and the Levites would sing. And this, of course, is reflected as what we now know as the book of Psalms, Sefer Tehillim, which we know are the songs. The basis of that book, at least, are the songs composed by or recorded by David in order for it to be sung during the worship of God in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash. So ve'ela asher hamid David al yidei shir Beit Adonai, and the following, these people, the ones who we mentioned before, were the ones that David stood up, he set up and standardized to do the singing and in the house of God, mimenoach Aaron, from the time that the Aron, the ark, came back and was established. So then remember that King David brought the Aron back from the captivity from the Philistines, brought it back to Jerusalem. And from that time, the service was transferred to Jerusalem from the tabernacle that preceded it. And although the temple itself was not yet built until the days of his son Solomon, but during that time period, David set up the system of song. Vayu Mishar Simon, they would serve Lifnei Mishkan Ohel Moed Bashir, in front of the tabernacle of the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. So this indicates that the Mishkan was there under David prior to the building of the temple, of the Mikdash. This is Mishkan as opposed to Mikdash, the tabernacle as opposed to the temple. Ad benot Shlomo, until Shlomo, his son Solomon, built at Beit Adonai B'Yerushalayim, the permanent house of God, well known as the temple in Jerusalem. Vayamduchim mishpatam al avodasam, and they stood and they fulfilled their responsibility to do their worship according to the laws laid down and the rules laid down by David. Ve'ela ha'omdim, and these are the ones that stood there, uvneihem, and their descendants. V'bnei Kahati, from the sons of Kahat, Haman HaMishorer, the singer, Haman ben Yoel ben Shmuel, who was the son of Yoel, the son of Shmuel, ben Elkanah ben Yerocham, ben Eliel ben Toach. So this was a descendant of Shmuel, of the prophet Samuel, ben Tzuf, ben Elkanah, ben Machat, ben Amosai, ben Elkanah, ben Yoel, ben Azariah, ben Svanya, ben Tachat, ben Asir, ben Aviasaph, ben Korach, who was descendant of Korach, ben Yitzhar, ben Kahat, ben Levi, ben Yisrael. So that was the Korach of biblical infamy, but these were his, and then Eviasaph, meaning Korach's descendant, his child, which we have, Psalms written by Eviasaph. This should not surprise one, because as we see here, he was the forefather of the singers in the Beit HaMikdash. Now I'm at verse 24. V'achiv Asaph, and his brother Asaph, ha'omed al yamino, would stand on his right, and his name was Asaph ben. Here, that doesn't necessarily mean achiv, brother, as in actual brother. It means his brother, his fellow member of the tribe of Levi, brother in that sense, members of the same tribe. What was his name? His was Asaph ben Berachyahu, the son of Berachyahu, ben Shima, ben Michael, ben Baaseya, ben Malkiah, ben Esni, ben Zerach, ben Adaya, ben Esan, ben Zima, ben Shimi, ben Yachat, ben Gershom, ben Levi. So he was a descendant of Gershom, the son of Levi. So they stood together and sang together. This was in the days of King David. And their direct descent from Levi himself. Uvnei Merari, and at the time of their singing, the sons of Merari, so we had the sons of Kahat, we had descendants of Gershom, so now we have the third son of Levi, Merari. I'm at verse 29. Uvnei Merari, Achem al Asmol, their brothers stood to the right. What was his name? Asan, his name was Etan, right? And his, who was Ben Kishi, the son of Kishi, Ben Avdi, Ben Maloch, Ben Chashavia, Ben Amatzia, Ben Chilkiah, Ben Amtzi, Ben Bani, Ben Shomer, Ben Machli, Ben Mushi, Ben Merari, Ben Levi, also directly descendant of Levi. So the three main singers were direct descendants. So all three tribes were all three sons of Levi, all three main branches of the Levite clan were represented in the singers when David established the singing. V'achayhem alavim, and their brothers, in other words, their fellow clansmen, their fellow members of the tribe, all the Levites, Nisunim, l'chol avodas mishkan beis Elohim, they were in charge, they were appointed to be in charge of all of the work that needed to be done in the tabernacle. So we know that work included carrying the tabernacle from place to place, putting it together, taking it apart. And then once it settled in the time of David in Jerusalem, they were in charge of its upkeep and so on. However, the Aaronu banav, Aaron and his descendants, they were in charge of the actual service. This is verse 34. Maktirim al mizbach ha'olah. They were the ones who would bring the offerings on the Mizbach HaOlah, that is the altar of the sacrifice, which was the altar in the outer courtyard, V'al Mizbach HaKetores, and on the altar of incense, which is the altar that was in the inner courtyard. And they did all of the service in the Holy of Holies, U'lechaper al Yisrael. Their purpose was to help bring atonement to the people of Israel. All that had been commanded by Moshe, the servant of God. So that was set up by Moshe, right? And as recorded in the Torah, and that task was given to Aaron and his descendants, while Levi and his descendants were in charge of the singing and the upkeep, and that was set in place by David, as we just read. So now let's talk a little bit more about Aaron, the Kohanim, the priests. We did mention before the line of the high priests, but of course there were many other priests that weren't high priests, and they had their place in society, and we're going to learn a little bit about them. Mostly this is going to be names again, but we're also going to have a couple of biographical details which are important. Ve'elev and Aaron, and these are the children of Aaron, Elazar beno, his son Elazar, Pinchas beno, Avishua beno, Buki beno, Uzi beno, Zerachia beno, Merayos beno, Amaria beno, Achitov beno, Tzadok beno, Achimaatz beno, all the way down to Achimaatz. And they settled and lived. Now, where did they live? So this is verse 39, and this is very important here, because all of the other brothers, we mentioned, so far, we talked about the land that they conquered and so on, and we know, of course, from the Torah that the priests did not have a portion in the division of the land, but we know that they were supposed to live among the people and that they had towns set aside for them. So over here, he is going to record how the people of Bnei Aaron, the descendants of Aaron and the descendants of Levi, where they settled and how they settled among the people. Ve'ele moshvotam letirotam bigvulam. And these are the places where they lived according to the buildings that they built within the boundaries set aside for them. Livnei Aaron, to the sons of Aaron, Lemishpachat HaKahati, who came from the line of the Kahati, of the Kahat family of Levi, Ki Lahem Haya Hagorol, because they are the ones that had the first choice, was the Kahatim, was the descendants of Kahat. So by the first choice from among the sons, children of Aaron, when space was divvied up to them. Vayitnu lahem et Chevron be'eretz Yehuda. They lived in the city of Hebron, Chevron in the land of Judah. Ve'et migrashah sivivoseh, ve'et tzedei ha'ir ve'et chatzeireha. But the fields of the cities, because we know that Caleb ben Yefuneh, right, who was not of the Levite clan, he received Hebron too. So it explains here that how did that work? Because the actual city was occupied by the Kohanim, but the fields and yards surrounding it were given to Caleb and his descendants, and which makes sense because Caleb, not being a Levite, he and his descendants would have been farming and providing sustenance for the city dwellers, who were the Kohanim, whose job it was, the priests, to study, to worship God, to teach, and of course perform the service in the temple. They also gave them the cities which were set aside as cities for refuge for people that inadvertently killed someone and needed to run to a city of refuge to avoid the vengeance of the relatives of the victim. As it says in the Torah, we know this as well, those cities were given as places to live for the Kohanim, for the priests. Which cities were these? At Hebron, which we just mentioned, Viet Livna, Viet Migrashah, and the fields surrounding Livna, Viet Yater, Viet Eshtemoa, Viet Migrashah, these towns and the surrounding areas, Viet Chilez, Viet Migrashah, Viet Tevir, Viet Migrashah, Viet Ashon, Viet Migrashah, Viet Beit Shemesh, Viet Migrashah, and the city of Beit Shemesh and its surrounding lands. I do not know if that city Beit Shemesh corresponds to the very important, large, modern city in Israel of Beit Shemesh, but that's where it gets its name from. Whether or not it's actually on the same location is a different story. Umimate Binyamin, and they also, now this is important, because not only did the people of Judah give land in order to give cities from their portion in order for the Levites and the priests to live, but also Mimate Binyamin from the tribe of Benjamin at Geba Viet Migrashah, that town, Viet Olemet Viet Migrashah, Viet Anatot Viet Migrashah. Anatot, a very important city of priests. Of course, we know the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, who was a Kohen, who was a priest, was from Anatot. This was a city of Kohanim, a city of priests, as we're mentioning here. So they had 13 cities, according to their families, divided up, living in those lands. Livnei Kahat Hanotarim, I'm at verse 36, and the remaining descendants of Kahat, who were not priests, who were just Levites, Mimishpachat Hamateh, from the family of their tribe, in other words, because they were same tribe of Levi, they were given land in the place where the half tribe of Menashe lived, so 10 cities. So Menashe also, again, emphasizing that the Levites and the priests lived among the people, and they were given cities to live in by all of the tribes, not just Judah, but Judah so far, Benjamin so far, and Menashe now. Livnei Gershom, and from the children of Gershom, Mishbechotam, they received land. So Bnei Gershom, those Levites that came from Gershom, they received land Mimate Yisachar, from the land of Yisachar, the other tribe, Mimate Asher, and the tribe of Asher, Umimate Naphtali, Umimate Menashe Babashon, and from the other half of Menashe that were on the east side of the Jordan, Arim Shlosh Esrei, they also got 13 cities. Livnei Merari Mishbechosam, to the descendants of the third major Levite clan of Merari, they received land Mimate Reuven, Umimate Gad, Umimate Zvulun, from the land of Reuven and Gad, so they were on the east side of the Jordan. Umimate Zvulun, which is up in the northwest of the land of Israel, the land of Zevulun, they received Bagorol Shem Esrei, a total of 12 cities. So now, by Yitnu Bnei Yisrael Alaviyim, this is verse 49, the descendants of the people of Israel gave Alaviyim to the Levites at Arim Yet Migrashehem. So this is pointing out to them how this is very important. It's a little bit of narrative, but it's extremely important to put into this genealogy in the context of the people now establishing the new land, the new nation, how they're going to live, to make sure that the people understand that they have to support the Levites and the Kohanim, who are going to be the religious leadership of the people, so that they need to be supported by the public. Vayitznu v'agorol, and they gave Mimatei v'nei Yehuda, Mimatei v'nei Shimon, Mimatei v'nei Yamin, es ta'er har ma'ela, asher yikru esen b'shemos. And they gave them out from the families of the of Judah, of Shimon, of Simon, and Benjamin, all of these cities which we just listed out by name. Umi mishpachos b'nei Kehat, and from the families of Bnei Kehat, they had Vayihi Arei Gvulam, their cities were given Mimatei Ephraim, from Ephraim. So we mentioned Kehat before, but some of the families of Kehat received land from Ephraim. Vayitznu lem et Arei Miklat at Shechem, which nowadays is usually called, I think Nablus is Shechem. V'et Migrashel Bahar Ephraim, v'et Gezer v'et Migrashel. Right, these towns. We had Yokmaam, we had Migrashah, we had Beit Horon, we had Migrashah, we had Ayalon, we had Migrashah, we had Gat Rimon, we had Migrashah, Umimachzis Matei Menashe. They also, from the other half of Menashe, this is the ones who are on the west side of the Jordan, received the towns at Aner, we had Migrashah, we had Bilam, we had Migrashah, Mishpachas Bnei Kehat Anotzrim, for the remaining Kehatian families that had not received from the other portions. At verse 56, from the descendants of Gershom, they got at Golan, Babashan, Viet Migrosha, Viet Ashtarot, Viet Migrosha, and so on. Umimatei Yisachar, and from the tribe of Yisachar, the descendants of Gershom got at Kedesh, Viet Migrosha, at Dovrat, Viet Migrosha, Viet Ramot, Viet Migrosha, Viet Onaim, Viet Migrosha, those towns and their surrounding lands. Mimatei Asher at Mashal, and they also received from the tribe of Asher at Mashal, Viet Migrosha, Viet Abdon, Viet Migrosha, Viet Chukok, Viet Migrosha, Viet Rucho, Viet Migrosha, so on and so forth. Mimatei Naphtali, they received from the land of Naphtali at Kedesh Bagolil, Viet Migrosha, the city of Kedesh up north in the Galil region, Viet Chamon, Viet Migrosha, Viet Kiryatayim, Viet Migrosha. Livnei Merari, to the descendants of Merari, Hanotarim, the remainders that hadn't received in the portions we mentioned before, they received Mimatei Zivulun at Rimono, Viet Migrosha, Tovor, Viet Migrosha, and so on. Ume'ever LaYarden, they also received on the east side of the Jordan, Yerecho, Lemizrach HaYarden, this is Jericho, this must be a different town of Jericho on the east side of the Jordan, Mimatei Reuven, from the tribe of Reuven at Betzer Bamidbar, the city of Betzer in the wilderness, Viet Migrosha and its surroundings, Viet Yatzah, Viet Migrosha, Viet Kedemot, Viet Migrosha, Viet Mefat, Viet Migrosha, Umimatei Gad at Ramot Bagilad, and they received from the tribe of Gad, Ramot, Viet Migrosha, Viet Machanaim, Viet Migrosha, Viet Cheshbon, Viet Migrosha, Viet Yazer, Viet Migrosha. This is the end of verse 66 and the end of this chapter. The primary point being to tell everyone that the entire people of Israel, every single tribe contributed cities and land for the priests and the Levites to live. The priests and the Levites lived among the people. They were not aloof, living only around the temple, but they were there, accessible to everyone, living in the places where literally the criminals would run, or the almost criminals would run for refuge. These they were embedded within the society. The entire society gave land and resources in order to support and sustain the religious leadership. This concludes chapter 6. Thank you so much for studying chapter 6 together with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 7 and, of course, the rest of the book of Chronicles together.